Hello, and welcome to Art Pop Talk. I'm Bianca.
And I'm Gianna.
Just when you thought Artween was over, we are throwing a special surprise your way.
That's right, don't get rid of your spooky decor just yet, because today we are talking about hauntology and Dia de los Muertos with the one and only Dr. Cristina Cruz González.
You've heard me talk about this hauntology seminar for way too long, so now we are bringing the seminar to you. Let's Art Pop Talk. Hello, Gianna.
Hi.
I'm in a new space right now.
I know. It's so weird to see you with a different background.
It is a much messier background. When we have the recording with Cristina, you'll see that it is just a blank wall. But right now, Gianna, for the intro, she gets the messy guest room vibe with Ollivander scratching at the door because he's not used to like closed doors in an apartment ever.
How is Mr. Ollivander handling the new apartment?
You know, he really loves it, actually. Like, I think he's like adjusting very well, and we have these like great windows everywhere, so I think he's really enjoying looking at all the windows because we're right by Boston Common, so we have like a bunch of people walk by all the time. We're on like a pretty main street by the park, and there's always people like walking their dogs, you know, in the park, or just like people running. And today Jenna and I are recording this intro on Halloween, and today there was like a big race, like a costume race, so people were like running in their costumes and stuff like that. And so Ollivander got like a very good look of all these people dressed up in like wacky colors and costumes today, and he was just like looking down the window, one person after the other.
Aw, so stimulating.
Yes, he has a lot to look at,
watching,
which is nice. Yes, he gets to people watch like all day. And he's enjoying all the he really likes the new rug we bought for the living room too. He enjoys like sleeping on that most of the time.
Kitten. I'm not going to be able to see Kitten on Christmas. You're not bringing him, are you?
I don't know. I don't think I will. I think he'll be able to keep Andrew some company.
Okay.
Yeah. But you can come up here and visit.
Yeah. You just got done visiting with Miss Audrey Kaminsky. Heard that was a good trip.
I did. It was very fun. She was my first guest in the new city. So Audrey and I went to a live show, which was pretty exciting to go to enjoy some live theater. And actually this coming week on Wednesday, Andrew and I are going to see Hadestown.
I don't know what that is. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
really?
What is
It's like,
I mean, I
it's the new big Broadway show, but it's actually showing in Boston. So we get to go see it in Boston, which is exciting.
cool.
So yeah, we'll be enjoying
I feel
some
like
theater this week as well.
Yeah, I feel like Boston or just some of like not like smaller East Coast cities, but cities that aren't New York, you get a lot of those good like preview shows before they like make it to Broadway too. So that'll be fun to look out for like in the future.
Yeah, I know that Boston does do a lot of previews for Broadway shows. So that's something that I had mentioned to Andrew too, which I'm excited about. But it seems like concurrently, there's like obviously the main production in New York, but it's also showing here.
Interesting. Well, let us know how that goes. All right. Well, I am very excited about today's Art Pop talk. I think it is a good combination of prior APT Art Halloween. So you all are going to get to meet Dr. Cristina Cruz González, who was a professor of art history for both Bianca and I at OSU, and just an incredible person and mentor and educator to both Bianca and I. So we're just so incredibly honored to have her on the podcast.
Yeah, I feel like Gianna and I have talked about the influences of this class for so long. And it was really just one of those full circle moments that we love to have here at APT. And talking with Christina was fantastic. And she's so brilliant and amazing. And she's an amazing art historian and instructor. And I just really valued the time that I spent with her throughout my collegiate years, and it was just, she was so influential to me, and I know she was to you as well. And looking back, that class, hauntology in particular, really influenced the way that I started to view the world as I left grad school. And just thinking about how influential that was, and then getting to speak with her here on the podcast was amazing. So you guys are just going to love this episode. And even Gianna was like saying she feels like she got kind of a secondhand experience from the class when I was always talking about it. And now I feel like the Art Pop Tarts are also going to get a hauntology seminar, you know, little teaser, if you will. And hopefully you'll be able to either take a hauntology seminar or course wherever you are, or Christina throughout the episode has a lot of different recommendations for you all as well, which we will link in our resources page for you guys, so you can do a little investigating on your own.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, as you said, Bianca, there's something about this episode that felt extremely humbling to me. As you
Mm,
mentioned, I felt like I did learn so much secondhand. And I think it is that humble reminder that you like truly don't know who you're affecting, um, and the ideas that you're putting out to the world. And when you actually have those people that are excited about that and then sharing those with other people in your field or that share that common interest, I mean, that's exactly what happened to me. And it literally has evolved into this like broad scope of vocabulary and concepts that I still use today and still exploring. So like truthfully, like Christina has no idea. I just feel like everyone we bring on the podcast is like, you have absolutely no idea like
really,
how
really, like how much
incredible
you
you
have changed
are.
my life. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So, and I also, I mentioned it in the interview with Christina, but we do talk about hauntology so much and how like we are still learning about it and peeling off these layers. And I think I do want to keep in mind, we do talk about these concepts so much, hauntology, like consumerism, feminism.
Hmm.
And I never want those things to just be a one off. You know, it's hauntology is hauntology is hauntology. It's feminism is feminism is feminism. You know, our perspective on it, and even just in our conversation with Christina, it totally like skewed my viewpoint about how I view certain works of art, in particular death portraiture. So
Hmm.
like it's just one of those moments where like you love to learn and discover new things. So I hope you guys get as much out of it as we did.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are also going to link some, like I said, resources for you guys provided by Christina in the conversation. And throughout the week, we'll be posting images and resources from her as well. So we are going to take a little break. And whenever we come back, we will be joined by the brilliant, phenomenal, amazing Dr. Cristina Cruz Gonzalez. Hello, Christina. Welcome to the show. I'm so excited that you're here. Gianna and I, first of all, can't talk about hauntology and spooky stuff without thinking about you. And it is just truly an honor to have you here on this show. So, can you introduce yourself to the Art Pop Tarts?
Sure, I'm thrilled to be here. I'm Cristina Cruz González, and I'm an associate professor of art history at OSU.
Oh, Christina is literally the most wonderful art history professor I've had in my entire life. So, little fangirl moment over here.
I could
Uh,
still change your grade to an A. Thank you.
okay, I'm not going to argue with you. Christina, would you please talk with us a little bit about your research interest in the field of art history?
Sure. So, in art history, I specialize in the early modern period, which is 1500 to 1800, roughly, and I concentrate mostly on Spanish America, which includes what today is Latin America and the Philippines, but also parts of what is today part of the United States, right? The Southwest area and Florida as well. And so I look at visual culture from that perspective, mostly sacred images and miraculous images, images that don't just exist for us to view, but actually perform, do something, right? They heal, they protect, they sometimes deal with the paranormal in unusual
Mhm.
ways.
So we talk about this paranormal activity within art history. We've talked about it on the show. And last year during Halloween is where Gianna and I really got to talk about the influences that we've had, that I've had because of your hauntology seminar. And I am always telling people about this seminar. Like, I went into it being like, as a scaredy cat, kind of scared to take a class about ghosts, but coming out of it, it was so amazing. So because of that seminar, I not only found this like deep appreciation within this kind of like new sector of art history, but I really began to appreciate the spectral in our everyday lives. So we before we start getting into the nitty gritty of this kind of spooky subject, can you talk about the importance of examining the spectral within art?
Sure. So that seminar, and I've only taught it one time, I'd love to teach it again, was designed as a graduate seminar, which is why you were in there. But we also had a few undergraduates, kind of stray students, and they had no idea, what they were getting themselves into. They thought
Not all.
it was hilarious, right? So I think from their perspective, we were just going to talk about ghosts and, maybe Netflix and some more popular TV series that deal with ghosts. And they had no clue that there's this whole kind of disciplinary take on, you know, basically the spectral, right? What is kind of absent but still present, a kind of trace and in between. And so they looked at the reading list and they were like, oh shit, what are we going to do? Right. And they like confessed. They're like, oh, we made a mistake. We didn't know it was a real course with tons of reading. And so I think like everyone came to the course, myself included, from our own vantage points, and then the course kind of worked together to bring in those different perspectives and allow students to kind of carry on with their own avenue and line of inquiry in terms of the research. So some people did write papers on that Netflix series. Other people were like more taken by trauma and how it is that we study trauma. So hauntology, this is a word that's coined by Derrida. So that gives you an idea of kind of the level of kind of critical inquiry that we were dealing with. Hauntology is basically the study of what is not kind of materially or ontologically kind of always within reach. So it could be the absent, um, the spectral, it's sometimes called, the trace. Oftentimes it's something aligned with trauma. And so what I loved about our course were the field trips and going
Mhm.
to Tulsa, for example, and looking at where the race massacre took place, right? So, kind of studying and viewing and experiencing this area, but also meeting with artists like Crystal Campbell and seeing how artists are kind of producing works that respond to that haunting, to that trauma, to the absence, and how they're kind of working to make it present in a way. And so, as an art historian, this is, I love this idea because, in my own work, trauma is very present with the conquest of Mexico. But I think for some other students in the course, they thought of it also in terms of kind of the genocide. Of indigenous communities within our own
Mhm.
United States and in Oklahoma in particular, so how can we as historians deal with these acts and with artistic responses to these acts in a way that's ethical and responsible, but also when the odds are so against us, right? Because these many of these historical events are driven precisely by erasure and the
Mhm.
the goal of erasure, and it's real, right? So kind of how do you delve into projects and archives and artworks that deal with absence? So it was a very complicated course. definitely a graduate level course. The undergrads got off easy by doing the reports on Netflix series and whatnot. But honestly, I know very little about, these films and these series. And so I wanted to learn that bit also, and seeing how popular culture kind of works with some of these ideas and massages them and kind of curates them for a wider audience. And they're quite smart about it, right? And so I
Mhm.
thought that was really cool and really good.
Yeah, I finally just watched Scream for the first time after we had our discussion with Lynn last week.
Hmm.
And just all of these ideas that Scream is presenting. And like, I used to take it for granted, it's just a scary movie that's like, not really doing anything in terms of visual culture or film history and things like that. But it's just so self involved and just situates itself within its own genre and lineage, just like different pieces of art do, just like any other piece of visual culture does. So
Right.
I think this is just like super fascinating.
Yeah,
Well,
I agree.
and it's also such I mean, it's just another word that we can add to our vocabulary that adds such a great entry point and another perspective to look at the variety of topics that you just suggested. We can talk about it in the physical world, but also in the artistic world, and how you just stated to handle that responsibly. But for my own purposes too, I was not in this class, but I made a joke for our last Halloween that I learned so much secondhand from Bianca and from this course that I really, really used it very strongly in my senior show. So it just, that class really did affect even the students that weren't in there. But because it provided such an entry point for myself being ignorant to this terminology before this class, how would someone who doesn't have that background in art history or any visual training start to engage with hauntology? And you did mention seeking out those pop culture references too.
Yeah, so I think everyone engages with ghosts in some way, right?
Mhm.
Because you could be my age and remember watching, Poltergeist for the first time, or you could be, 20 years old and watch these Netflix series, or you could be playing the Ouija board. I hope not
Mhm.
too often, and engage with the spectral that way. Um, so ghosts are like really present in our imagination,
Mhm.
right? Ghostbusters. So we already do it on some level, but we don't really think about it, and we don't really kind of
Right.
critique it. And also as art historians, because we're so invested in what's visually present, we hardly want to give any space to absence.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
how do we study
Mhm.
what's not there? What looms, and so it's difficult for us as art historians. But I think for any student or reader who wants to kind of begin a serious journey into this, I would begin with, for instance, Toni Morrison's Beloved, right? And our course read that. Um, for many students, I would say most, it was their first time reading this book. And it
Mhm.
was, traumatizing, I think, for many people. It's a tough book, but it's like a real kind of, you're jumping into ghost and the ghostly and the spectral. And the traumatic when you're reading that book. If you want a more kind of academic critical take on hauntology, I would suggest Sadiah Hartman's Venus in Two Acts, which is also a reading that we had in the course. And it talks about, the archive and the relationship between violence and the archive, and how we as readers and historians and archivists deal with this kind of repository without reinscribing the violence that basically lays at its foundation, and this is very important for folks, whether you're dealing with colonial Latin America and the conquest and the kind of genocide involved with that, or with slavery in the United States. So those two texts, Toni Morrison's and Sadiah Hartman, I would say should be at the beginning of one's kind of entry point into this topic for sure. And then maybe the Poltergeist and the Netflix and what.
And the absence of ghosts is something that really does fascinate me, because in, the midst of spooky season, we've talked about so much that Bianca and I are such scaredy cats. And I was talking with my partner Phoeben, and he kept saying, but why are you scared? Like, what is the why? Like, what is this like metaphorical like hold that these like hypothetical ghosts have over you? And I think that was just it. Whether it is a literal sense or a metaphorical sense, it's still something that I am engaging with and something that I am fearing. Even if it is real or unreal, I'm still having a physical and bodily reaction to it.
Right. I'm a scared to get too, by the way. So anything freaks me out. I still get freaked out just thinking about certain films, not even watching them, but if I just think about The Exorcist, I'll be like totally freaked out, and I won't be able to sleep. I'll have to turn the lights on, and it's all over. But it's interesting that that was, your partner's response, like, why?
Mhm.
Bother you, or what is it about it, that's scaredy, that makes you a scaredy cat? I kind of was in a similar situation where I was really afraid of a neighbor once when I lived in Mexico City, and she kind of put a hex on me, and I didn't know what to do. And she was kind of, from my perspective, really insane. And so I talked to family members that, have more experience with what to do in these situations. And they said, well, you could try this. You put a bucket of water at your door every night, and in the morning, you toss it, and you could refill it at nighttime. And then you could also get a particular kind of wood and make a cross with a red ribbon and put it on the inside of your door. And you could also, they started listing different things for kind of combating this witchcraft.
Mhm.
and and then at the very end, they said, or you could also not believe. And
Wow.
Mm.
that's also an option, and nothing could happen basically to you if you just
Mhm.
go with that option.
Yeah,
So wow,
Yeah.
okay, I could also not believe.
that is fascinating.
That's yeah, Gianna, I also like what you brought up just in terms of I think that my very best friends who are like, big horror lovers and they love that sense of adrenaline that they get when they feel scared, but I think something that was also brought up in the class is like not everybody feels the effects of trauma, and I think what was great about the course is how we talked about trauma being kind of ingrained in people's DNA, and that is kind of this absent presence that it's a type of ghost, but it is physically embedded within you, and so some people are going to experience fear differently based on like their DNA. And I think that was another really interesting thing, just to put fear and trauma and hauntology kind of in a new perspective. Like, it's, you cannot believe, and that's an option in some instances, but sometimes it's bound to you in this
Right?
way.
Yeah, it's real, and there's no denying it because you're
Right.
kind of living it.
Right. So, speaking of ghosts and the impact that they have and how they live with us today, I was wondering if you could talk with us about the visual legacy of Dia de los Muertos in art and art history.
Sure. So we're upon one of the most important holidays in Mexico and in many countries in Latin America, increasingly. And so that is Day of the Dead, November 1st and November 2nd. For many people from Mexico, particularly, they'll say it's their favorite holiday. Actually, it's a very joyful event. It's a celebration. It's a time when we remember the people who have left us in this world, and we welcome them back basically on the 1st and the 2nd of November in a party. So it's not an individual affair, it's a real kind of communal kind of memory making, a performance of that memory. I think lots of people have seen the film Coco, and it's a very
Yeah.
cute, Disney Pixar film and whatnot. It's also really sad and true at its core. I think it really conveys the meaning of Day of the Dead very well. Remember me. This is a pact, right? Day of the Dead kind of canonizes that pact we have with the people we love who have left us, that we will remember them and we will kind of materialize that as much as possible uh, on November 1st and November 2nd. So this takes the form of music and food, community, and altar making, right? And having this big kind of colorful altar in one's home or in one's kind of public square, oftentimes, where pictures of the dead could sit and be venerated and come to life to some extent. So it's not this ghoulish, scary event. It's a very kind of happy event. We
Mhm.
want the dead to visit us on these days because we want them to kind of get that taste of life that they once had, if only for this short period. And we want to be there for it. We want to be there
Mhm.
with them. So in art history, usually everything is kind of pushed under this umbrella of Day of the Dead iconography. Any skeleton, right, is kind of considered Day of the Dead. And that's a tall order, basically, because not every skeleton is related to Day of the Dead, but it is related to a philosophy of death
Mhm.
that maybe is shared by and large in Mexico. So death as being something that is not just accepted but lived with, ridiculed, made fun of, popularized. Death is something that is kind of essential to life in Mexico and in many shapes and forms. But I don't want to forget, and this is a part that maybe not a lot of people know, um, who haven't experienced Day of the Dead, that it's also very political in many ways.
Mm.
And so this is where it becomes really fascinating for me as an art historian. If we were in Mexico City right now, we would not just kind of visit these altars and see a kind of sacred ephemeral production. We could also see very kind of political altars as well that have been conceived by different artists that are kind of responding to some crisis in the country. And it could be kind of assault on women, for example, and there could be an altar that speaks directly to that, to women's rights in the country, or it could be, as it was when I lived in Mexico City some 7, 8 years ago, an altar that is demanding that the government do something about the 43 disappeared, right? The 43 teacher training students that were kidnapped and executed, and the government wasn't responding to the demands of more information on this. So many artists kind of took advantage of the Day of the Dead celebration to install these very poignant altars that were experienced by a public as well. So I would say that the first artist to really kind of popularize this death political imagery is Jose Guadalupe Posada, and he was a kind of newspaper illustrator, and he would make these kind of calaveras, these death images that are very much alive, in order to criticize the government regime, the dictator regime at that time. And he would do so in a very kind of biting way that was also hilarious, that kind of utilize death imagery. But you could see that same kind of death imagery in, of course, Coco most recently, but also classic films like Serge Eisenstein's Que Viva Mexico. Beautiful Russian film, and the director was obsessed with Mexico's obsession with death and wanted to capture it in these vignettes as well. In art history, also with some of our more popular artists from the 20th century, like Diego Rivera, Frida Kahlo, they also deal with death. And in fact, I just saw the Frida Kahlo film with Salma Hayek the other day, and there's a lot of that kind of death references in the film as well. And the kind of very particular Mexican relationship to death is not just referred to in her artwork and in this film, but also in the music and in the soundtrack that's very kind of cleverly used for it as well.
What I find so interesting about this holiday is not often do we find performative or cultural works of art that I guess that we acknowledge that take place in such a private setting as well as a public setting. I feel like when we were just talking about more well-known, just like visual performative works of art, they take place on a public scale because that's kind of the point of them. That's the point
Hmm.
of your performance. But uh, the fact that they can take place so publicly, so politically, but then internally for you and your family and that private aspect, I find super interesting. And I think also just in terms of hauntology, I find it interesting because hauntology or being haunted is so loaded. And I think it so often has that negative connotation to it. Like if you're being haunted by something, it's like not good,
Mm,
right?
right.
Um, but and maybe you can elaborate for us then. I think hauntology is a little bit more broad in that manner, just because you're haunted by something, especially in the scope of the visual cultural history that we're talking about today. It's not always a negative thing. So my question for you is, how does Dios de los Muertos connect to the field of hauntology? And should they be considered in the same realm, or should we kind of take them bit by bit separately?
I think they could be considered. They could also not be considered in the same realm. I could see how there's some overlap and how ontology might be useful for studying, absence and how absence is made present, and also studying ephemeral altar productions, both in the private sphere and in the kind of public square, and what they mean in for each community, the kind of personal home, but also the kind of civic community as well. But I think there's limits to hauntology in that case for the reasons that you mentioned, because uh, Day of the Dead is 2 days, basically, right? So it's not, this. And it's a kind of celebration that's very much delineated by the living, not by the dead, right? So we're kind of prescribing it, who we choose to put on the altar, what kind of wax or flowers or types of food we leave on the altar. The dead have very little say in Day of the Dead in a way, whereas hauntology, that's not the case in a way. There is a kind of more of an agency, I find, that's granted to the absent in hauntology, weirdly, than in Day of the Dead. Day of the Dead is a celebration that is really orchestrated by the living, and it's kind of therapy, I think, for the living as much as anything else. So, I think hauntology may be useful, but not entirely, perhaps.
That is so fascinating. When I think so often of other forms of like death portraiture, death works of art that's constructed by human beings, that really does make me consider hauntology a little bit. I was looking so much at death portraiture and the coming about of photography, and I remember we talked about that last year, but how that is really constructed by the human being for the human being to like
Mhm.
honor that dead person. It's not really like, we know that it's a hoax. We know that this like floating angel or this guy that coincidentally might look like Abraham Lincoln, wink, wink, like isn't really this haunted spirit. It's for us. It's constructed by us. So that's such a
Mhm.
key way to look at it.
Go ahead.
Oh, no, just thinking about, like, this idea of curation also is, like, really interesting and thinking about, like, the connections between art history because I think that, like, many of us who study this have this, like, innate response to want to, like, fit things nicely together or, like, make something presentable in that way, and I think what you just said is such an interesting, I don't know, way to think about the 2 differences, how ghosts act upon us as spirits and as presence in whatever form, but then how we curate the experience of
Exactly.
ghosts and spirits, and that's so wild. I love
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, I don't want hauntology to just be like a one-off. Like I don't I want us to think about it like more critically. And even if I I think back to our prior conversation, I think we were considering it in that way, those death portraitures in that hauntology scope. But that's such an interesting and new way for us to look at it.
Awesome. I'm very taken with the work of Titus Kafar, who has done these amazing portraits that show benefactors or these kind of elite white males, looking out onto their private estates and whatnot. And he's literally kind of peeled these away to reveal like servants and enslaved members of that whole kind of retinue. And in a way, kind of peeling back the layers to reveal the spectral, And so
Mhm.
I think that one could think about that process as a practicing artist and what it means to peel back layers and make the absent present, if only through trace,
Mhm.
but also think about it as an intellectual exercise as well as historians, and how we do that. How can we do
Mhm.
that, basically?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, is there anything that we haven't asked you about Dia de los Muertos or hauntology that you absolutely want our listeners to be aware of?
Well, not especially so, but there is this kind of idea in Mexico, at least, for uh, there's Day of the Dead, and that's a celebration, as we've explained. But there's also this fixation with things that scare you as well. So just because Day of the Dead is happy doesn't mean that this is a country that doesn't get scared often. And so I'm interested in these stories that are kind of designed to, in a way, deal with trauma, but also to kind of scare, contemporary audiences. And La Llorona is one of these stories. La Llorona is to put it in its simplest terms, is a woman who's a ghost who goes around, the land kind of wailing and crying over her dead children whom she drowned out of frustration and desperation. And there have been sociological and kind of historical studies of this tale that it has pre-Hispanic roots. But it's also a story, I think most would agree, that is born of the conquest, right? Because it's always this told as this indigenous woman who's in a fit of rage or dejection over her husband, sometimes described as a conqueror, or as a Spaniard, or as a landowner. So it's about miscegenation in a way, maybe violence, but also infanticide, and the kind of wailing that she does, and moaning for her children is very eerie. And in a way, this female ghost is a kind of mother, a kind of goddess, and a kind of Virgin Mary, all in one, right? That's one is kind of wanting but is always unable to really grasp. And La Llorona is very popular in Mexican culture, but also in other parts of Latin America now. And as a child, you're told this story, um, basically as a warning to not kind of go off into the dark, to stay by your parents' side. If you don't stay with me, La Llorona is going to get you, right? And you know exactly what your parents mean. You could almost hear the ghost. So you're not going to wander off too far. And it's made its way into popular culture as well, in just kind of representations, but also in music. So I'm interested in music, lately, and how music could kind of convey the spectral as well. And La Llorona is a song that's been kind of arranged and performed since probably it traditionally for a very long time, but formally since the 1940s. And very famous composers or singers have sung it, Chavela Vargas, but also Lilo Downs. More recently, Joan Baez sings a version of the song as well, and it has a different effect depending on who's the person singing it. And it's probably not coincidental. I don't know if you guys know the band Beirut, but Beirut also has a song called La Llorona, and they're from New Mexico. And La Llorona is also very eerie on that album, and kind of plays on these kind of Oaxacan notes as well. So music cannot be ignored. Day of the Dead, spectrality, hauntology, the paranormal. There's also a soundtrack to that. So it's a kind of multisensorial sphere that we're dealing with.
This is fun for me because I was just talking about immersive art today at work. So that's definitely been on my brain. But we did talk about the performative aspect of it, the ritualistic aspect to it. But even just thinking about music in a Western sense or a Western cinema sense, with the arrival of Squid Games, I've been
Oh,
hearing a
right.
lot about the music and the soundtrack to this new show, and how uh, we are so triggered by these two notes, and how it's like we're like an animal like trained to hear a sound, and like we know we're gonna like get a treat for like hearing the sound. Like we hear these two eerie notes and we're instantly gonna be like triggered by that and know that this is what the tone is, and I know exactly what I should be feeling because of that. And it's this very like sensory, like
Mhm.
traumatic, curated response. It's super weird, and I think that's probably about as creepy as it can get. um,
Absolutely.
but Christina, you did just tell us a little scary story, but we like to end the show on a fun question. So we were wondering if you did have a favorite ghost story, or if you have a favorite scary movie that you wanted to share with us.
Well, that was my favorite scary story, La Llorona. There are also kind of funner ones that border on just, being ridiculous, like the goat sucker, the chupacabras. If you're from, the Southwest, particularly Texas and northern Mexico, you'll remember from like maybe 2 decades ago that this is like a, quasi goat like animal that would feast like a vampire on unsuspecting people and suck their blood out or whatnot. And it just got really ridiculous, kind of tales of this apparition of this goat sucking beast. And we did with it what we always do. We made fun of it. I don't know if there were memes at the time, because this is quite a many years ago. But if it happened today, for sure there would be memes of it, and we would be ridiculing the whole notion. That response, that kind of comedy, the laughter, the laughing at death, and the laughing at what otherwise scare you, is also something that I find kind of worth studying. Right, that that kind of way of dealing with the unknown. I deal with the paranormal all the time, because in what I study, it's not just charges of idolatry that continue during the colonial period in the 16th, 17th, 18th, even 19th centuries. The idol is never fully vanquished. It's always around the corner. It's always being hidden behind altars, but also with witchcraft and these accusations of witchcraft. And some of them are kind of creepy. So, my favorite kind of creepy story is my own. I was in an archive in Mexico City, in the Inquisition archive at the General Archive of the nation. And there was a case I was following about a woman who was accused of kind of conjuring up the devil. And she went into a church with a man, and she was spotted by a servant who was at the door and kind of witnessing all this. And the two went in and went to the altar, turned the crucifix upside down, disrobed to the waist, And according to this witness, this woman who was leading chants, she also started marking different kind of diagrams on her body and on the man's body as well. They continued to chant and pray. What the servant said was to the devil quite clearly. And then they got some cotton balls and wiped off the designs from their body and clothed, left the church and locked it up. And so the servant gives this testimony. And not only that, but kind of turned in to the authorities the cotton balls that were left behind with the black ink on them or whatnot that was wiped from the bodies. And so the Inquisition file had a little envelope with these cotton balls. And so I took them out, kind of looked at them, felt them. And, as a historian, I thought, oh, this is so effing cool. This is great. As someone who's invested in material culture, I thought that was fantastic. As a scaredy cat, I was like, oh, I'm touching the devil. Right? It's the devil still here. So yeah, so that was kind of a freakish experience, and I kind of couldn't wait to wash my hands, figuratively, literally, after that experience.
Oh my gosh, that is an APT story for the books. My gosh.
Truly, the bravery it takes to have been able to do that. Nope, I would have
I'd be
left him
like,
in the envelope.
I'm
See you
out.
later.
See you later. Research over. It's so
Yeah, like I
hard.
don't need to. The research isn't worth it. Like.
It's so frustrating that one, I'm so glad that like you powered through and you didn't give in like Bianca and I would, because I get like so frustrated with myself. Like the more that I'm like so interested in all this stuff, but like I can't do it alone. Like if I was in an archive by myself with some ghosty artifacts, absolutely not. Like that would not happen. Like I would need
Definitely not.
to like hire someone to just sit with me. And I feel like that would be a
Yeah.
good gig to have for a little bit. Sit with a scaredy cat, learn about some ghosts.
Sometimes
Yeah.
the ghosts are not so kind of malign, and sometimes they're just like any voice that speaks to you in an archive, and it could be a ledger that you're reading through, and then there are little details that you're like so happy have been included, and you almost imagine this, kind of civil servant putting together these inventories or ledgers, and this person is speaking to you, from 300 years ago or whatever, and you're like, thank you. I really need to know that was done, with feathers. This is very helpful for me as an art historian. So
Right.
there's a kind of dialogue in place that is really beautiful in many respects between yourself and the dead when you're in an archive.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
such a lovely way to like humanize the process as a historian, as well as you just said. Christina, we could not be more grateful for you to be here with us today. We've been trying to get you on the pod for a while, so we are so excited and so honored. Is there anything else before we let you go that you'd like to share with our listeners today? Anything exciting that you have coming up or that you want to plug?
Well, I just went to Mexico City, last week. I was there for a couple of weeks. I just returned, and I was interested to see kind of what types of celebrations would be taken. Well, first of all, I was interested to see if it still existed. We've been in our pandemic bubble, kind of in isolation, and one almost wonders, like, is the world still there? And so it was nice to
Right.
get on a plane and nice to be in this like sprawling metropolis of 20 million plus people, and to be reassured that indeed it still exists. The world is still there. And cities like Mexico City, I'm sure every major capital is not just has not just survived, but it's doubled down and has committed to thriving. And you could feel this energy, and it was so beautiful to feel, so alive. And so it was the best, research trip that I could have taken. It was really wonderful. I want to encourage everyone to, whether it's Mexico City or Rome or New York or anywhere, to make those trips and to kind of be reaffirmed that we're not just survivors, we're also going to double down and we're going to thrive.
Mhm.
And so that is one thing I would like to leave you all with, but also because it's homecoming weekend, I want to wish everyone a happy homecoming and wish our football team luck against Kansas. And I hope everyone enjoys the weekend.
I
Yay.
love it. Christina, thank you so, so much for being here today. If you have any questions for our special guest, you can always email us at artpoptalk@gmail.com. We're on all the social media platforms at artpoptalk. And if you like this content and you want to hear more, you can donate to our Buy Me a Coffee account, which is in our link tree on our website. And with that, we will talk to you all next Tuesday. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Art Pop Talk's executive producers are me, Bianca Martucci-Fink.
And me, Gianna Martucci-Fink.
Music and sounds are by Josh Turner, and photography is by Adrian Turner.
And our graphic designer is Sid Hammond.